Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. This is the Finch Show. I am James Finch. My guest on the podcast this time is Christopher Speer. He is an artist, he's creator, he's a massive Star Wars nerd, which is awesome. I love it so much. We had a great conversation, talked about everything he does. He's also a member of the 501st. If you're not familiar with that, stay tuned because we're going to talk all about that. I'm going to just shut up and get into it. Ladies and gentlemen, here's Chris. Okay, so I think like the 2.5 years now I've been doing a podcast, I have had all shapes and varieties on, different backgrounds, everything. But I think today is a first because this might be the first time I have a San Francisco Giants fan on the podcast. And I think that's okay. That's okay. Like we all make mistakes. It's all right. Anyway, I wanted to drop that on you right off the bat. How big of a Giants fan are you? Is it just a casual thing, or are you kind of hardcore?
Recently in the last few years, I've not been following the team as much just because life and everything.
Right.
But I mean, I worked for the Giants retail stores for a few years. I've kind of casually, been a fan during kind of the Bonds era. Basically, it was kind of hit and miss and everything. It's kind of one of those things where Bonds is like, he's there's all that controversy, but he's still our guy kind of deal.
Yeah.
So it's a flip. But no, the last few years have been like really stellar. I've been watching the team a little bit more because I kind of need that, you know, that sense of control, if you will, in my life at the moment. So
well, if anything, baseball is a great like decompression thing, right?
Yeah. And it's one of those things where I think like right now in baseball, it's like one of the best times because you're getting all these young kids coming up and everything that are really good and whatnot. And it's kind of one of those things that like, no matter the team, you're going to find talent somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Like the Cubs, they're super hot right now in the last few years. The Rockies have always been good. Dare I say it? I mean, the Dodgers have a pretty good lineup most of the time anyways.
Yeah.
And it's fun seeing the magic that can kind of happen out there on the field. And that's kind of what makes it fun. I will still be a Giants fan through and through. That's me. But part of my love for the game is also recognizing that there's, a lot of like really good skill out there and not just in the States, but also internationally as well. So, yeah, it's one of my favorite things is watching like world baseball kind of deal and seeing all of the international teams kind of get it on it. And they're really good. Like they're really stinking good.
Yeah. Even, one of the things that's like 100% on my bucket list is to go to Japan and watch a baseball game because over there, they treat baseball the way we treat the NFL. Like a guy will draw a 4-pitch walk and the crowd goes berserk, right? We're talking.
It's like more of a national pastime for them.
Yeah.
It seems like than it is for us. And we were the ones with the original concept kind of deal.
Right. Yeah.
So
well, anyway, before I like bore all the nerds who are listening with a whole bunch of baseball talk, but I do have to say like, and you're lucky being a Giants fan because you've gotten to experience this several times. Like, I don't care if it's basketball or NFL or what it is. Absolutely nothing compares to the feeling of October baseball when your team's in the running. Like there's no better feeling than that. I have to admit, I mean, in 2016, us Cubs, we got one. That was our first one in 108 years. And that was still like one of the most magical like months of my life is that postseason.
I still get chills listening to the kind of the last few minutes of the last game kind of deal. And just again, the magic that was happening in that moment. Because I mean, here was a team that, as you said, hadn't won a World Series in over a century, and this was their moment, kind of deal, and it was just amazing.
Yeah, and it was. I remember listening to an interview with Pat Hughes, who's the radio play guy for the Cubs, who got to be the one to say the Chicago Cubs win the World Series, and he had said later, "You don't understand like how like important that was because 108 years ago, radio didn't exist. So he literally got to be the first person to ever say on the radio airwaves, Chicago Cubs win the World Series." And that's, I mean, I'm kind of where you are. I haven't been following as much this year because they're trash this year and I've got so much other stuff going on. But yeah, still, I think last night I put the Cubs Dodgers game on and it was nice to just, put the feet up, relax, take it in. It's a great mental escape. And even just going to the ballpark is so much fun. It's such a laid back, relaxed, but still fun atmosphere. It's great. So do you think we just talked a whole bunch of cosplayers and 3D printing enthusiasts to get into baseball, or did they just skip ahead through that part of the video?
Probably skipped ahead, I would
imagine. All right. Anyway, I have to ask you, kind of being, I first of all, I love the work that you do. Like some of the stuff that I've seen you put on your Instagram page, I'm just like, that is absolutely amazing. When you first began building, did you begin 100% the 3D printing route, or did you start differently?
So, I mean, first off, my background is that primarily I'm an illustrator. So I've been doing kind of the art world for a long time. I mean, ever since I was like, a little tight kind of deal. And it's only been within the last 8 years that I've really kind of begun to be more of a maker. I still do a lot of drawing, but it's definitely kind of evolved into being a maker. And I actually used to start with kind of the ground materials, if you will, of like, EVA foam and using like foam core and stuff like that. Really kind of cheap, easy to get a hold of materials kind of deal, and kind of just paving my way towards using like ABS kits that have been like vacuum formed and everything. And then it's only been within the last couple of years that I've been doing kind of the 3D printed route. And for those who don't know, there's 3D printing. There's filament printing, which is kind of taking strings or this string of plastic, melting it, and then the printer takes software that it reads and makes a shape, basically. And then there's resin printing, which does the same thing, but in a different way, because resin, it's this liquid material that it's making into a solid form kind of deal, which is really cool. And that's something I'm going to eventually get into. But for those that are getting into 3D printing, it's as much of an art as it is a science, because you have, first off, it's this really cool technology that you're able to do practically anything with. But with that, you have a lot of like technological stuff going on and everything. And I get questions all the time on that kind of stuff. And even I'm still learning to kind of deal too. In no way am I like a complete expert, but it's been a lot of fun. It's been a lot of fun to kind of learn both the software side of things and also the hardware side of things in terms of maintaining the printers and everything. Because these cost not a pretty penny, but they cost enough that you want to take care of them and everything. So
yeah, it's a whole new world to step into. Like if you decide to get into the like 3D printing route, like whether you're doing cosplay or you're just like wanting to make stuff, because just like you said, you're learning, first of all, your printer, like how does it work? Why does it work? What's this? What's that? What are all these problems you run into? The software side of it, which is a whole nother bag of tricks that you go through this massive thing of trial and error over. And then like, I don't know, would you call it like the post-production? Which seems to be like the most time consuming part of it.
I have found in the couple of years I've been doing this that the post-production is the longest task usually, but it ends up being kind of the easiest because you're just sitting there sanding and filling and doing whatever to complete the print, to make it look like it's not a printed object. Resin printing is a little bit easier nowadays because it's such a clean print right off the resin printer itself that there's very little cleanup that needs to be done. And then you have machines out there that are able to do both the curing and the wash cycle that you need for resin prints in that same process, because resin, needs that cure time basically, and then it, you need to wash the residue that comes off with that. But I would say that more often than not, usually if things are going well, printers are great. But just like the ink jets and everything, or the laser jets for an office printer, 3D printing can have its own, gremlins and everything. So
yeah, I can't tell you how many times I want to take my very first printer and just like throw it in the dumpster and pick a new hobby. I was so angry, and it was like, and it would get frustrating because when you have like zero background, zero knowledge in it, and it starts doing something really goofy, and you go do like a Google search and go to these forums where like 10 people are giving you 10 different reasons that it's doing that, and it's just, yeah, it got, but at the end of the day, for as kind of janky as that first printer was, I'm really appreciative because you learn so much just troubleshooting, and now it's like a problem pops up. I'm like, oh, that's this, and fix that real quick, and then on you go.
And especially when you're in a field in which, in retrospectively, it's only been around with the public for like a decade thereabouts. That's quite significant in that mindset. We're, in a way, you can think about it like the days of the internet. It was with the military for X number of years, and then it dropped into public domain basically. And there were all these questions about, what was it? How did it work? What were the nuances and everything? In ways we're still learning. And that's been around for longer, of course. But I like that aspect. I like the education, if you will, of it and everything. And, each problem that occurs is a chance to learn, kind of deal. Mm-hmm. So
because I remember a time when 3D printing was like science fiction. Mm-hmm. Like just the notion, like you'd hear these weird things about how, some super smart people in some room somewhere figured out how to 3D print stuff. And you're like, I remember the first time I heard them, like, how? And then because you're thinking printing, you're thinking a copy machine, right? You're thinking, how the hell would you print something in 3D? Like that doesn't even make any sense, right? And I think it was the third Jurassic Park 3. They had a 3D print. I'm trying to remember, that had to have come out early 2000s, maybe. I don't remember.
So.
But they
something
had a
like that
3D printer in there where they had 3D printed like the voice box for a Velociraptor. And to me, that seemed like one of the more science fiction-y things in the whole movie. Never mind the dinosaurs. It was the fact that this guy could just like print this thing. And then, it seems like really commercially anyway. It feels like it's been the last few years that all of a sudden there's been this explosion, not only of interest, but of technology, of the amount of people that are doing it. And it's been really crazy to see.
And the fact that now it's so reachable now from an economic standpoint kind of deal, like the average Joe can go out and spend like, $100 on like a desktop model kind of deal and be able to print something like the size of like, like K2SO or something like that, is something that's kind of truly amazing in that aspect, that you can go from that kind of thing. And then, there's a maker out there that I'm actually partnered with, who's well known in at least the kind of the Star Wars, and specifically for like clones and Clone Wars and everything, Galactic Armory.
Oh yes.
And he's known for the last few years of making like really solid 3D print files and DIY kits basically for clones and Clone Wars content. And he's got a print farm now that is up to like 75 printers, something like that. It's incredible. He's actually just finished a life-size, he's working on finishing a life-size print of Master Chief from Halo. And of course, for those who are Halo fans, they'll know that he's like 7'4", 7'5", somewhere in that ballpark.
Mm-hmm.
Just monstrosity, and it's magnificent.
Yes, I've been following that closely because it is just absolutely blowing my mind. Because if you go to like Etsy, Like he's got the 3D print file for a model for that. He's like, oh yeah, I just upscaled it
That's this big.
700%. Yeah. And the thing is absolutely massive. And I keep dropping hints to my wife, like, I don't want to do that someday. But then he says it took him like 7 printers and like 4 months to do it.
Yeah.
Because even something like the foot had to be like broken into like 4 different files to print. And
Right.
wow, that's so cool. I want to do it. I don't know if I'm gonna, but I want to do it. But yeah, the and you're so right. Like commercially, like that was the most amazing thing, is that like right now, like folks, if you're out there and you're interested in getting a 3D printing, it's not like you have to go drop thousands of dollars on some fancy equipment that you don't understand and then start using it. Especially now, I think we're to the point where we're getting along far enough where you can kind of find used ones for even really good. You could come across people here and there on eBay and even like Facebook Marketplace selling. They get, they bought one, they got into it, decided they didn't have the time for it, or maybe they got frustrated and gave it up. And you can swoop in and get a pretty good bargain buy for that much.
There's a couple of 3D print groups I'm a part of on Facebook, and as much as it also is showing off the work of that some people are doing, it's also there for like support and everything. For example, I run a lot of like Creality printers, basically, which are like one of the best filament based printers on the market. There's the CR10 series, there's the Ender series, which actually the Ender series is probably a really great like beginning printer for those who are wanting to get into it, because they're generally small, they're fairly compact, they're usually fairly easy to maintain. And they're really inexpensive. Like, for example, their desktop version, which is like, about maybe like an 8x8 profile, maybe a little bit larger kind of deal. That's right around like 150 right now, which is for a printer really not that expensive. In some cases, it's even cheaper than office printers kind of deal. But like I said, it's really astonishing to see how like accessible it is and everything. It's crazy.
Well, and there's enough companies doing it now that it's creating competition. Yes. Like you got to make the better printer and make it, give it a good market point. Otherwise, yeah, you're gonna have all kinds of problems.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and the fact that and what's really incredible is the applications it can have too. For example, they're 3D printing houses now, which is like mind-boggling, but it's the same kind of setup. And what's really cool with that is you can scale it to however large your gantry basically is, your printing perimeter, if you will, kind of deal. And they have the guys that have been like, pioneering this and like getting this all set up. The houses themselves are really economical, and it's all about trying to just get the mix right of the concrete itself, because you don't want it to set too quick. You don't want it to, set too long, because you're still kind of continuously doing the layers. But it's really cool how that comes together and everything.
Yeah. I feel bad. I can't remember his name. There's a guy on TikTok that I follow who I don't know if it's his company or he works for a company that does that stuff. And he's always posting stuff. And I always tell myself, like, dude, from this point on, like if I ever intend on building a house, like that's the route I'm going to go. Cause he said like, it takes him basically a day to set the track and all the equipment up. And then for the average size house, it takes about 40 hours for it to print.
Yeah.
And then a day to take all their equipment down. And it's like, you're talking about building a house, man. Like if you were to do that classic lumber and all that stuff and have the foundation,
weeks, if not months.
Yes. And they look amazing. And the fact that like, virtually on like computer programs, you can have input in designing the house in terms of how big you want the rooms and, whether you want to do radiant heat within the walls, whether you want to do old school duct heat. And that stuff is absolutely fascinating. I'm interested to see over the course of time, like over the next like 5 to 10 years, what it is that we do will look like, what I mean, in terms of like the kind of printers that are coming out and all the, all the bells and whistles that they're going to have on them and capabilities. And
one of the big things that I see all the time is a plug in and play model. Now, I know that's probably for many things that's not quite, there's always going to be some sort of like knowledge, thing that needs to happen, or, maintenance or whatever. but I don't think for 3D printing we're quite there yet. I think somewhere between like, the next maybe 10 years down the line is where I think we're going to get something that's pretty close to a plug and play. I don't think it's quite there enough to be able to be like, this is self-sufficient kind of deal. You kind of get there with like, if you have like a BL touch sensor, which is basically, for those who don't know, it's an auto leveling system for your printer. And every time you go to print something, it'll auto level, your bed, so you don't have to worry about leveling, because that's kind of a big part of it. That's kind of got its own issues every so often kind of deal, but it's kind of the best, if you will, plug in and play thing on the market, because you kind of just set it and go kind of deal.
Mm-hmm.
And then you just have to worry about, reloading filament, when it runs low. But I think we're about a decade away or so from actually having a true plug-in and play model. I don't think it's quite there yet.
I thought we were there, only because I'm ignorant. I've told this story in the podcast, so I'm not going to go into it. But I had to it was a little over a year ago. I had just made a mention offhandedly to my wife that I thought 3D printing was cool, not knowing anything about it, having any background in it whatsoever, and so she decided to get me a 3D printer for Christmas, and I'm like, whoa, this is so cool, and I thought for sure, like, oh yeah, you just, it's a microwave, it's an appliance, you set it up, you plug it in, you upload a file, and it comes out beautifully perfect. Oh boy, let me tell you, I spent weeks thinking there was something wrong with that machine. I'm like, is this a lemon? What do I need to contact it? What the hell is wrong with this thing? And then you start going down the rabbit hole and you're like, oh, extruder, filament, bed leveling. Okay. And it's a lot. I always, because I've gotten to the point now where I've gotten a couple friends, then I'm sure you run across this all the time, who are interested in getting into 3D printing. Mm-hmm. And I always tell them the same thing. I'm like, be patient. It takes time. It takes time to learn all this stuff. And, there's no better teacher than experience.
Oh, yeah. Oh, definitely. And I mean, as I said before, the main thing is the education of it. You're never in a state where you're not learning something kind of deal. You might have periods where that's, kind of, it's spread out, but you're constantly learning, you're constantly, fine tuning and figuring out what works, what doesn't work kind of deal. Even the equipment itself. For all the printers I have, and I don't have a large farm kind of deal. I have like 6 kind of deal, but that's because I do a lot of production stuff. I have upgraded like a lot of the stock that comes out of the box kind of deal. I've upgraded like the stock hot ends kind of deal to something that's a little bit more robust, the tubing and everything to make sure that the filament slides out smoother and everything. And that kind of took research and fine tuning to figure out what works, what's available for those printers and everything. So, because not all printers are the same,
Yeah. I think, as we say that, I think one of the biggest things that I've come across from following people in the community and being members of groups on social media such as Facebook, the biggest thing is that it feels like everybody and their brother is trying to find a way around sanding. Like they're trying to just circumvent that process. And I've seen some really crazy stuff, stuff that's what was it? The UV resin, which looks like it works really well, but that stuff's like insanely toxic to work with.
Well, what's toxic? Well, there was a video that had cropped up about a month or 2 ago, maybe a little bit longer, of this technique that I saw, and it was actually airbrushing resin onto something and UV curing it kind of deal. And that in itself is actually really toxic. And it's also really messy too, because essentially what you're doing 2 things. You're creating resin to be an aerosol at that point, which you have no control over how that spreads kind of deal. And thus you're inhaling whatever vapors are with that, no matter what your mask setting is set to, because you need a mask if you're going to do that, which I don't recommend. And then 2 is you're going to get it everywhere. I would guess it's even more of I do a lot of like spray painting and everything for my stuff, and I have a mock paint booth set up and everything. But I know that particulate is eventually going to find its way outside of the booth and everything. I can only imagine what resin's going to do, in that aspect, and it's harder to clean. It's hard to clean up and everything. You need like acetone to clean that stuff up and whatnot. Mm-hmm. What I have found that's actually worked a little bit more recently, and it's a little risky for using like PLA, which is kind of like a really good beginning. And I mean, even as an intermediate, I use it all the time kind of deal. It's a type of filament that's goes really nice through printers and everything. But the caveat is that it heats up really well. Like, for example, you can't leave it out in the sun, your print will melt kind of deal. So I've done a couple of things. First off is for the sanding is I have both an orbital and I have a mouse sander. The mouse sander especially helps speed up the printing process a lot. And if you're careful and constantly move it around the print, you can actually get a pretty good sanded model in like 30 minutes kind of deal if you're diligent, depending on the print size and everything. And then like do like hand sanding and whatnot in the crevices that you can't reach with that. The other thing I do for a lot of models that I know I'm worried about like the structural rigidity of PLA is I actually have seen a fellow maker use this stuff, and I've been using it for the last 50 prints kind of deal, is epoxy resin. And specifically, this is a 1-to-1 mixture, basically, where you got the resin and then you got the hardener. There's a couple of different resins out there, but the epoxy stuff is basically ones that people they use like for tables kind of deal, like the really nice tables. And then there's like this nice clear surface you can see into it kind of deal. That's that stuff. And it takes about 24 hours to cure. But for example, I have a Death Trooper costume inspired by Rogue One that's with the 501st and everything. And I've been upgrading its parts. And recently I resin coated those parts with epoxy resin, and I have very little sanding to do. It filled in those print lines so good and everything. Like I said, it took about 24 hours to cure and everything, but it's kind of worth it for if I can go spend time doing something else and not having to worry about sanding that as much kind of deal. Trying to think of methods to, kind of let something set and be while I go off, do something else kind of thing. And inevitably there will always be sanding. I think that's just, the nature of the beast. With resin printing, you don't have to worry about that so much, but definitely for filament printing, there's just no way around it.
Yeah. And I don't think once I remember like when I was new into it, so he's like, oh yeah, after it comes out, yeah, because I was like frustrated, like why are these prints coming out with lines on it? Like the hell? Oh yeah, you just got to sand that. I think I was prepared for like how much sanding I was gonna have to do, and then B, how many different types of sandpaper I was going to have to keep in stock in my own house, because it's just like, okay, now it's like you look at my room, there's everything from 40 to like 1500, depending upon what kind of part it is I'm doing, where I need to get really fine, smooth, I don't know if you find that where it's sort of like, when you're doing like the helmet of something or like the front facing part, you want to get that like as smooth as humanly possible, because that's going to be everybody's first impression.
I have found that like for some helmets, I can go up to like, 300, 320, somewhere thereabouts, and have it still look pretty good. Because, I'm going to weather it later kind of deal. But for other, things where it's like you have like a gloss or even like a chrome finish, like for example, the Mandalorian helmet as a classic example, because so many people have been printing that helmet for like the last few years because of the show.
Yeah.
Which I can understand why. Given his chrome look and everything, and chrome is such a fickle material in of itself. I would say it's probably one of my least favorite finishes, just because it shows all the imperfections that you may have missed. I actually have a buddy of mine who did a Captain Phasma costume from the Force Awakens and Last Jedi, and it's brilliantly done and everything. And he he went through the chroming process 5 times
Ooh.
before he went to go do it professionally. And for that, you have to, you have to make sure that your surfaces are pristine. There can be like no dust or whatever on there. And if you make a mistake, you have to take the entire coat of chrome off. Because chrome does not stick to chrome that well. It's like silicone in that way. Nothing else sticks to silicone like silicone does, basically. And like I said, if you're there's like even the tiniest imperfection, that's going to show up better in chrome than any other material. Same with like a gloss coat or gloss finish kind of thing. It shows the imperfections really well. So when you're talking about, post-production on a print or whatever, it's kind of like you got to ask yourself, is this going to be a weathered thing? Is this something that I can kind of hide the imperfections on? Or is this something that's going to be polished kind of deal? And, the sandpaper itself kind of helps dictate that. I'm working on a Vader costume at the moment, and I am doing like this EFX, because their EFX back in the day made a really nice helmet cast that's kind of based on the A New Hope variant. And it's a great piece, don't get me wrong. I just don't like the plastic look for like, kind of looking like the movie characters, because they didn't use plastic, or at least not that much,
right?
So I went in and started kind of doing the production work of sanding that and repainting it, and I've had to do that like twice because of like the eggshell effect that goes on and everything, and then all that stuff. But I have up to like 2,000 grit myself kind of deal. So
even that, like with the gloss, I ran into that the very first time I did a stormtrooper helmet. I did a scout trooper helmet, and after printing it and after sanding it and priming it and sanding it and priming and sanding it, I thought this looks really good. The first time I got that coat of gloss white on it, I'm like, this thing's garbage. This thing is total garbage. Like I gotta get the rotary sander out and like start and just strip all of this off, because you're right, every time. Even like a speck of dust, like you can see it clear as day. Any kind of stuff that I thought wasn't visible at all under the primer, and then dipping all that gloss, especially if you're in any kind of light, like as soon as the lights are. And that's what I think is so difficult about the Mandalorian helmet, because it's just like such a dome where it's just like, there aren't anything in there like, to break up the smooth surfaces that are all over that helmet. That
absolutely,
when I see people turn some out that literally look like they're made out of metal, it is just freaking mind blowing, because you have to appreciate how difficult it is to get that to look that well.
Yeah, there and speaking of the metal ones, there's actually a guy who I've been following for about 2 years now, basically as long as the Mandalorian has been around, maybe a little bit longer kind of deal. And he is part of this car and like custom and manufacture shop out in the Midwest. And he's a welder, he's a metal worker by trade and everything, and he did like this little YouTube series of where he made the Mandalorian armor out of metal. I don't remember the types off the top of my head, but his name's Matt Schwartz, and if I think it's May the Schwartz be with you is his Instagram handle or something like that. But phenomenal worker, and actually he kind of inspired me early on, because he not only did the armor, he also did the sewing progress of like the soft parts and everything, and he turned out a really nice Din Djarin, which looked phenomenal. But you're right though, in that there are makers out there who turn out these pieces that look like they came out of a metal factory kind of deal. It's crazy the amount of skill that's out there.
Especially because I remember I've been going to cons now for probably 15, 16 years, and seeing the leap in quality I like from that time until now. Like I remember back in the day, everything was made with foam, or you'd even just you know people would attempt to sew like a Wolverine costume together, and yet you walk around cons now, you know, and it is mind blowing, and that's why I hate stopping them because I know they're busy, but I love getting in conversations with them all the time. Like, how did you do that? What did you use? You know, well, this part's foam, but I 3D printed this part because it's weight bearing, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, you could just go 100% down the rabbit hole with some of the people on this stuff. Which, you know, and it's funny that you bring up the Mandalorian helmet because that was sort of like, for me, the Mandalorian helmet was like the linchpin. Like I was one of those guys because the original 3D printer that I had that my wife got me was a real small one, you know, and I only used it for doing like minis for like Dungeons and Dragons and stuff like that. And I remember watching The Mandalorian and thinking to myself, man, that'd be so cool to have a helmet like that. Like, okay, technically I could print that on my little printer, but then you'd be making these little tiny tiles. And, you know, back then I had no understanding of PLA welding. It was just all I used was super glue. And I'm like, that would look like absolute garbage, you know, if I got a bunch of tiles and tried to like glue them together. And so I ended up doing some research on like 3D printing, like a Mandalorian helmet, which got me to buy my next printer, which was a Soval 01. And now I've got 4 down in my basement, not Soval ones, but 4 like printers beyond the little one. Yeah. So anytime I see somebody printing a Mandalorian helmet, for me, it's like, oh yeah. Cause I think for a lot of people, that was the gateway drug, right? Yeah. Like that was the gateway drug that got them into 3D printing. And now they're just like, you know, so deep into it, they need to get another mortgage out on their house to buy filament, you know, because
basically
I have to ask you about the 501st.
Sure.
Tell me about the 501st. I'd love, like, I'm aware of what the 501st is because I remember seeing like I don't know if they have official titles like detachments or units at cons for years, and knowing that they're like you know basically a what would you call it, like a stormtrooper cosplay organization, or you know, I'm just gonna let you explain it.
No worries. So the 501st is this worldwide group of people who are fans of Star Wars, basically. And our goal basically is to do costume, camaraderie, and also charity being like one of our big things that we've done. Worldwide, we've done, you know, we've given millions of dollars to various charities around the world and whatnot. And I myself, I haven't done a whole lot of announcements and everything. I'm actually doing a charity auction myself later over the summer kind of deal that will be kind of a continuation of that and everything. But it's all these guys and basically all the costumes, they're fan made. There's no, contrary to popular belief, there is not an affiliation with Lucasfilm at all. They, you know, they support us and everything and what we do. They love what we're doing and everything, but we have no affiliation with them whatsoever. And we are, I mean, as simple as our slogan, we're bad guys doing good. And we love that concept that, you know, these guys who are like the stormtrooper, for example, you know, that takes you right back to, you know, episode 4 kind of thing, you know, where you see them coming out of the airlock for the first time. And then of course you have Darth Vader there. And it's one of those things, and we strive for screen accuracy. And I know that for a lot of people that may sound like, you know, like we're sticklers, like we're elitists in that kind of style. It's not that at all. It's that we're striving to recreate the magic that people have felt or had felt and continue to feel whenever they watch those films, because it's kind of like, you know, there's Vader on screen there, and then now he's in front of me kind of deal. I saw this video of somebody who was suited up in Vader, and he was at a school, and the kids in the hallway, it sounded like they were at a Justin Bieber concert, you know, kind of deal. Just this outpouring, you know, cries of joy kind of deal for just the presence of that. And then on the flip side, which I have actually been able to feel this before, is, you know, we'll go to like children's hospitals kind of deal. there is nothing more magical, I think, than being in a costume of a character that's been on screen and everything. And this is where I think it's most important that, you know, you're looking good, that you're looking as if you're you know, on screen and everything. Because as much as adults will know kind of the details, for those who are like really avid fans of the film, kids will tell you, you know, if something's off, kind of thing.
Aren't you a little short to be a stormtrooper?
Right, right. But there's nothing more magical than to go to a kid who's, you know, health wise, whatever the case may be, not doing so hot, and just their eyes light up and everything. That's kind of the magical bit. And it's not just the 501st that does this. There's actually like 3 major costuming groups that are like worldwide. There's the 501st, which is bad guys. There's the Rebel Legion, which is all about like the heroes and everything. So you got Luke Skywalker, you got, you know, Han Solo, Princess Leia, and all, you know, and all the costumes. You got heroes from the prequel era and also the sequels and everything. And then you got the Mandalorian mercs, which are kind of their own thing. And, you know, you got Boba Fett in there, you got Django, you got legends like Cal Scarata and, you know, all that kind of stuff. And the Mando mercs have something extra in that you can make your own Mandalorian, which is something I've been working on and off for the last few years. And you can, as long as you kind of got the overall feel, you can kind of do whatever you want, kind of thing, which is both liberating and terrifying, because then you're like, okay, I got a plan, but is this what I want, kind of deal,
right? You know? and you never quite know how it's going to look till it's in front of you. You're right.
No,
you know?
No, exactly. And that's where something like, you know, the you know, where you're doing something that's kind of on screen, that's kind of like, okay, you're kind of getting into the feel, you're getting kind of, you know, you're working out the materials, you're getting, you know, this kind of exactly right, you know, and everything. But, you know, with something that's kind of custom, that's a little bit more daunting, because you've got the skills. Now you got to go and make something yourself, kind of thing, from your own concept, kind of deal. So it's like, yeah, cool, but yeah, terrifying.
I can understand that on both sides, 100%. Like that feels to me like, oh, this feels like the most creative thing in the world. I get to just make up, and then you probably get like partway through and be like, is this going to look stupid? Am I going to look like a total idiot? Is this going to work? I'm like, oh God, should I? Yeah, I can completely understand that. What's the 501st? Is there like, I guess I would say like a governing body that oversees everything, or is it just?
Yeah. So what it because it's, you know, like 14,000 or so members worldwide. I'm not kidding. It's like the biggest collection of Star Wars members in a, you know, in a group, basically. And at one point we had a member on every continent, kind of deal. I don't know if we still do. But there is kind of a governing body, if you will, that kind of is there to kind of just, you know, manage, you know, our charters and everything, and trying to make sure that, you know, we're all having a good time and everything. And then it's broken down into different garrisons, basically, so different regions. So I'm part of the Golden Gate garrison, which is this area of California where it's basically the Bay Area, if you will. And not every garrison has this, but it's our garrison in particular is broken up into squads, and those are also region based. So I'm part of the North Bay squad, which is kind of above. It's kind of in the area above San Francisco a little bit, in a kind of compromising kind of northern, the Northern Bay Area, if you will. We've got a Peninsula squad. We got South Bay. We got East Bay, kind of deal. If you know the Bay Area, you'll know these terms. If not, it's a little confusing. But we have garrisons all over the world. There's the Canadian garrison. The German garrison is by far the largest garrison, and they have over 1,000 members. Wow. To put that in perspective, my garrison, we have, I think, 200 wow. active members and everything. So the German garrison's massive. and we have we have a garrison in the Netherlands. There's one in the UK. There's several in China. It's all over the place. But the overarching idea is that we're all out doing events. We're all and one of the things that we have is that to be an active member, because we recognize there's also people in the military. There's people that maybe aren't able to get out and troop every day, kind of deal. Is that we ask that we just have people do one troop a year kind of deal in their costume. And it can be whatever costume. Like, for example, I have 6 of my arsenal right now that are finished and are with the 501st, or at least affiliated with the 501st. And, you can do one troop in any of one of those costumes kind of deal. Mm-hmm. So, and your status is counted as active basically, or you could be like a reserve for a year if you're not able to troop kind of deal, or whatever the case may be. But yes, to get back to the original question, that there is kind of a governing body within each area, and then we're all in charge of our own merch basically that we set up to get approved, and we can have like little trading and everything. It's just a fun time for Star Wars fans and whatnot. Yeah.
Do they have do they have any specific rules in terms of like what armor you need to wear? Like, can you wear clone era? Can you wear first order era?
So that's where it kind of gets interesting, because the 501st gets broken down even further with that, and where you have detachments. Okay. As exactly as they're saying. So, like, for example, me being a Clone Wars guy and everything, there actually is a detachment that's centered around the clone troopers. So you got the movie clones from like Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith. You got legend clones, which are also kind of in that same category. Like Alpha 17 and the Null Arcs and whatnot from like the Dark Horse comics. You've got the clones from like the Clone Wars TV series and all their variants and whatnot. And then, as you're saying, there is a group for like the First Order troopers. There's technically a group for like a detachment for all the stormtroopers, and then there's like the officers, and then there's the and there's one for like the Sith Lords specifically. So it kind of goes on and on. But yeah, it for as massive as a group as we are, we try to have some sense of order with all the
right,
the planning and everything. So
that's crazy. And maybe it's just like I was like I'm to the point I want to say, what year was it that the Phantom Menace came out? Was that like 2000?
I think it was 99, 2000, somewhere thereabouts.
Yeah. So I was 19 when that movie came out. Prior to that, all we had was the original trilogy.
Yeah.
So there was like Stormtrooper, Scout Trooper, Snow Trooper, or Pilot. Like there wasn't a lot of variants, and it's so cool now. Now sometimes I'll be flipping through cosplay pages and stuff, and you see like you can literally see like hundreds. I mean, between like the clone era and the the Galactic Civil War era and so on, you see so many crazy variants that a lot of them are still technically screen accurate.
Definitely. It's one of those time periods in which like now it's like one of the best times to be a Star Wars fan, because you get so much that's coming out, that's like out now kind of deal and everything, with the explosion of the video game industry, and also the live action shows and everything that we're getting now. There's just so much content out there. Even the I mean, as you can see back here, I've got, a lot of the books. I don't have all of them, but I have a lot of the books that are coming out from like, the Legends, category, as well as canon and all that. And there's just so much there. And I get this, actually, I get this from my mom, actually, in terms of, because she grew up with me growing up with Star Wars as being kind of my main realm and everything. I mean, I'm a Lord of the Rings fan. I'm into Marvel and everything, but Star Wars is kind of like my primary realm, where I try to learn as much of the ins and outs, all the connections as much as possible. I'm nowhere in expertise in that matter, but it's one of those things where like I try to absorb as much as I can. And at times it is overwhelming because there is so much, and there is also plenty more that's coming out. Like, for example, Dave Filoni just posted earlier today that, you know, the Ahsoka series is now in production, kind of deal, and he did that with the chair with the Ahsoka title on the back and his hat, kind of thing. It's his classic hat, whatnot. And the internet's exploding with that, and pretty much. And then, of course, we got the Kenobi series, which I'm stoked for, that's coming out. We've, of course, had the Book of Boba Fett. We've had the Mandalorian season 3 wrap up recently with filming, and it's going to be airing later this year, which it's phenomenal. It's phenomenal time right now. And I can't wait for some of the films that are coming out that have been announced. Like, for example, I can't wait for Taika Waititi's film, that project that he's working on.
Yes.
Because, I mean, anything that guy does is like gold.
Yeah.
So
yes, for sure. It's great. I love that. You know, you're dealing with a universe that, I mean, yeah, you could get into like the old Republic stuff if you wanted to. But I mean, in a lot of ways, we're talking like if you go from like the prequel era to like the introduction, you know, from like Phantom Menace all the way through, you know, the Rise of Skywalker, you're dealing with a big thing of time. And so you can do stuff where it's like, oh, this, like, you can do like the Rise of Skywalker that has that like first order feel to it. But then I love it, I gotta admit, being the old school fan that I am, when they do stuff like the Mandalorian that has that galactic Civil War feel to it in terms of the outfits and the armors and the ships. And
that's one of the things that I loved about especially Mandalorian season 1. And I think I love season 2 a little bit more, but especially season 1, of that, because this is like post the Galactic Empire by about 5 years, give or take. I love that there is this blend of the old and the new kind of deal, and it feels real, kind of thing. It feels like an extension, if you will, of where we left off in the Return of the Jedi, to where, you know, Din is now, you know, on his journey and everything, which I predict that they're probably going to groom him to be the Mandalore. They're kind of like, especially if you compare old, you know, like Legends lore, everything about Mandalore, they're basically grooming him to be that.
Yeah.
But aside from that, is it from like the sets and the scenery and the costume and everything, like when we were seeing the stormtroopers and especially also even the Death Troopers and the Moff Gideon at like the season, the final 2 episodes of season 1, that's where it really felt like these worlds have blended together, kind of deal. They've become one kind of thing, which is exactly what you want to have, like a continuation of a story kind of deal. Or at the very least, in this case, it's a story that's taking place in a universe that's already, you know, pre-existing in our minds for the last 40 or so years. And to do that, it's really difficult, but they pulled it off so well and everything. And I think having folks like Dave Filoni and like Jon Favreau be part of the creative involvement with that. And of course, you got John Knoll, you got, you know, Dave Chung, I think it is his last name. I forget it at the moment. Sorry. It's this wealth of knowledge that's been accumulating for years, kind of deal. And of course, you know, John Knoll being like an ILM, like grew up kind of back in the day, like, you know, with all of that, it's really incredible to see that come to fruition. I'm glad the people that are in charge are doing this, because, you know, I think if you tweaked it in any other aspect, like if you had a little too much Empire emphasis, or if you had, I don't know if it would be quite right. So, I mean, everything from the costumes to the ships to just the overall nuance of having remnants of the Empire still around, I think they did very well. It's amazing.
Yes. And I feel like Disney is really smart, because whether it's Star Wars or whether it's Marvel, they're smart enough to let the storytellers tell stories without getting in the way, without getting studio execs and focus groups involved, and oh, you got to have this in there and you got to shove this in there. Like, get the creative people, let them do their thing, and they will make you a butt ton of money in the process. You know?
Oh yeah, yeah. Without getting too much into it, that's one of the things that, you know, with the sequel trilogy, having there been so much controversy around that series, and then of course having it come out that there wasn't, you know, a whole lot of planning that went on with it and everything. For me personally, The Last Jedi was the most beautiful cinematic wise. I think it's one of the most beautifully done films of what we've gotten so far. Rogue One probably up there with them, because Rogue One had a lot of like mixes of miniaturettes, like what they did back in the day, and a lot of this amazing CGI. But I think Last Jedi kind of tops it a little bit. But I think the story always felt a little lacking. Just in my general opinion and everything. I mean, you know, I know people that love it. That's fine. You know, as long as it's there to entertain, it's done its job, kind of deal. That's what a movie is all about, kind of thing. But I think just the overall story, it didn't feel like like the main characters kind of grew a little bit. If anybody, the primary, if anybody, the character that grew the most was Kylo.
Yeah.
When you break it down piece by piece, it's Kylo Ren, Ben Solo that grew the most throughout the trilogy. Mm-hmm. And I think that was probably always their intent, but in a way he felt like a side character that got a lot of main character story, if you will. There wasn't a lot of development that went on with him, or at least it felt like there wasn't a lot of development that went on with him as much as there could have been, kind of deal, if he was to be like a full main story character. Mm-hmm. Which, I mean, he basically was, if you look at the trilogy as an entirety. But you always thought that like Rey was the main character in this, and you got Finn and you got Poe and everything. I just feel like there needed to be more, and they just that. The fact that there apparently wasn't much of a sense of direction and everything makes me wish that there had been, kind of deal.
Yeah, that movie felt like it was just keeping the seat warm for J.J. Abrams to come back and do the one after. That was, and then I gotta admit, like, I didn't have a problem at all in The Rise of Skywalker with Palpatine coming back, except for the fact that it felt forced at the very beginning. Like, oh, by the way, Palpatine's back, and it's like, dude, if you had 3 movies, you could have like woven this into the story arc and brought it on. Even if you didn't reveal it until this movie, that's fine. But it just kind of felt like, you know, they did that movie and sort of the idea was, okay, make a movie, make it entertaining. Don't change the characters too much to screw it up for JJ coming in after. And, you know, it felt safe. You know, it felt like it did some new things, but ultimately it was, you know,
like in a way, because I mean, for me, my top 2 movies are Empire and Rogue One, and sometimes they flip back and forth and everything. And I think for the new movies, Rogue One was more of a chance in a way, because you're already dealing with a story that's directly involved with what's coming next, kind of deal, which is the OG film.
Yeah.
And then you're also trying to make it feel both modern and still within that storyline, kind of deal. Mm-hmm. And I feel like in a way, it's kind of like what was done with the prequels, if you will, in that you're making another prequel film, but it's really hard to do, to kind of go back in time and tell a story that's cohesive and making it blend. It's kind of the same problem that Weta Workshops and New Line Cinema had with the Lord of the Rings, in telling kind of, if you will, a prequel era of the Hobbit films and everything. They had to go back in time and tell that story and still make it blend, you know, with, you know, the already established universe. It's very hard to do. And I think Rogue One was more of a chance, because you already got this kind of established line of characters, that you already got this established universe that you're trying to, blend together, and you don't want it to screw up or anything like that. And what I find so interesting about Rogue One is that it's such a simple concept. It's literally taking that first line of dialogue out of the opening scroll of A New Hope, and that it's that rebels have infiltrated and stolen the plans to the Death Star. It's such a simple plot, and yet they've turned it into what I think is probably like one of the finest 2 hours and a quarter masterpieces in the saga kind of deal, just based on the fact that the concept is so simple kind of thing. And I think if it wasn't so simple, I don't know if it would be as successful. I think if there was too much going on with that concept, then I don't know how well it would go. But I think they took more of a chance doing that than they did with the sequel trilogy, because with the sequels, you're telling an extension of the story that happened afterwards. So you got plenty of chance just to go anywhere you want, because nothing's been established afterwards. And with that, I don't think as much planning with that. I don't think there was enough planning with that, given that notion and everything. You had plenty of, ways to go with this, and you took this direction, which wasn't maybe the greatest kind of deal.
Right.
So,
well, it's kind of always been as somebody who's like a fan, like a huge fan of the original trilogy. I don't know if I've told this story in the podcast before, but like Empire always has this like special connection to me, purely because of the fact I'm not going to get into the long story. When I was in first grade, I was in a car accident, and I was laid up in a hospital. I want to say for 6 weeks. Yeah, it was like 6 weeks. And this was at a point in time where I was on the children's ward of the hospital I was at. My leg was in traction. I couldn't go anywhere. They didn't have cable on the TVs in the room. And the entire unit, they had one TV with a VCR and a cart. And they had two movies, Care Bears and Empire Strikes Back. And I must have watched Empire Strikes Back, I swear to God, like 5-6 times a day for like 6 weeks, because it was either that or stare at the window. There was nothing else to do. But when you get into Rogue One, it was a new story. It was an original story. It had 100% the feel of the original trilogy.
Yes.
But tied into stuff you knew. And the thing that I love about that movie is that you go to the original trilogy, right? We know Darth Vader. Like, we know Darth Vader's a badass. Like, we know that. But when you look at those three movies, most of it is through presence and intimidation.
Yes.
When in Rogue One, you get to see him go like full Sith Lord on a bunch of people, and just like, that whole scene where he's just like jacking those rebel troops up, and you're just like,
I gotta tell you, I mean, I think I gotta give credit to Gareth Edwards for using because recently I saw the behind the scenes documentary that they did. They did it several years ago after the film came out, but I recently saw it on YouTube. Fantastic documentary on Rogue One if you want to see it, because they talk about like all of the concept and the nuances, everything. And Gareth mentions that, when you're using Vader, for something like that, you can't use him too much because he's not the main story guy. So it's a matter of when you bring him in and how often you bring him in, kind of deal. I think he did it brilliantly.
Yes.
Kind of thing. There's that little snippet that we saw with him, with Krennic going to Mustafar, which I hope we go back there in the Kenobi series. It looks like we might, given some of the footage and the trailers and everything, which is partly why I'm so excited. But you get that little snippet there in that scene, and then you get him at the board where they're getting ready to board the ship. And then you get him in the hallway scene, which is like, I think one of the best. They've done several hallway scenes now in the saga, but that's like one of the best ones because it's so unexpected and so terrifying and awesome at the same time.
Yeah,
because you see, and my Vader that I'm building is actually based on the Rogue One look. For those who don't know, Vader's suit changes every film.
Yeah.
I like to say it's not Star Wars if there isn't a continuity problem.
Right.
but it's Vader's suit in Rogue One, and I've done the research over time. Is this perfect blend between A New Hope, the way he looks like in A New Hope, which is kind of that nostalgia feel, and the amazing badassery that is the Empire look and everything. They took those two and kind of blended them together. You got this amazing suit that looks awesome in Rogue One, and just combine that with the fact that you get this amazing fight scene at the end. It doesn't last long, but it's long enough to solidify your mind that this guy is not to be messed with.
Right.
Deal.
Yes.
Yes.
And you can just see it in your mind where it's like completely black hallway. The troops are staring and you hear the like creaking metal and then just.
I think it's that creaking metal. And then the second breath that comes afterwards,
yes.
that it's that tension that you feel kind of thing. It's like, what's coming? Oh my God, it's him, kind of deal. And you for a split second, you feel for the rebels at that point, and then it's all on Vader. Like he's amazing.
Yeah. But you feel bad for him, but you want to see him get jacked up.
Oh yeah.
That's just,
I mean, I've read the Vader comics that have come out from like Marvel and everything from like the last, and for those who are not into comics, or at least who are at least getting into kind of that realm, read the Vader comics because they're amazing. And there's this one issue, I forget what issue it is, but he's on a planet and he's surrounded by like a battalion of rebels or something like that. And his one line as he ignites his lightsaber is, "All I see is fear and dead men," referring to the men that are about to be dead by him. And it's one of those lines that it's one of those scenes that I kind of felt watching, because I watched Rogue One back again recently, and it's kind of one of those images that kind of entered my mind as I'm watching this fight scene in the hallway. It's like, this guy is not to be messed with, honestly.
No.
No one has a good time with Vader.
No. He didn't get invited to the office party very often. He just seemed like he'd be a bit of a downer. Well, hey man, we are up against the clock here.
Okay.
You got first of all, I mean, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me. I feel like this is one of those things where if we had 4 hours, we could fill 4 hours. Easily. We could just keep going and going and going, and it'd be great. But hey, I do want to say once again, thank you. And you got anything to say to folks on the way out?
God, closing, right. How do I do this again? I just wanted to, first off, thank you for having me on. It's been such a pleasure and an honor and everything. And I'm glad to just kind of just sit down and talk stuff and everything. But to the audience and everything, I just want to say, if you're a maker out there, keep on learning and everything. If you're not a maker yet, it's a lot of fun. It's a lot, it's a lot of trial and error, but it's a lot of fun for sure. Definitely well worth it. So, and I appreciate the listeners just hopping in. If you skipped past the baseball bits, whatever. But yeah, thank you.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much, man. And we'll catch you next time.
All righty.
Thank you. All right, so that was the episode with Christopher Speer. I want to thank all of you for tuning in, listening, liking, subscribing, all that good stuff that everybody does on the internet now. It's so important. I'm going to get out of here. Until next time, I just want to say that I love all of you, and I hope you take care of each other, and we'll talk to you next time.